Nanbaka is the deadliest high-security prison on a remote island from which no one has ever been able to escape alive, but one of the prisoners from Cell 13 with his secret SS rank abilities decides to escape this hellhole with his friends alive. The supervisor orders all escape routes closed, but the inmates manage to slip through a metal door. One inmate wearing a blue cap uses a card to reveal invisible laser traps and leads the others through with comical moves until another inmate in a black striped shirt easily deactivates the traps by cracking the password. After triggering more traps, they climb through a duct filled with sleep-inducing gas, escape a giant ball, and barely avoid electrocution. But eventually, they return to safety through the same tunnel. The warden and supervisor are furious and send a man named Yamato to stop them. Yamato chases after the inmates, but he has my girlfriend's sense of direction and loses his way immediately while asking for directions. Meanwhile, the inmates continue their escape without any interruptions and soon encounter a group of armed men. One inmate, Nico, jumps in to save his friend and takes a shot, only to realize it's just a tranquilizer that doesn't affect him. While the armed men are momentarily stunned by the failed shot, Nico and his friend take advantage of the distraction and make a run for it, successfully escaping. Soon they come face to face with a pack of deadly dogs, but Nico watches Dog Whisperer on Nat Geo, so he easily tames them. Following that, they finally reach a huge iron door which separates them from freedom, but their hearts sink when they find the supervisor waiting for them outside. They immediately attack the supervisor with all their strength, but the supervisor is much stronger and beats the shit out of them before throwing them back into their prison to rot once again. Surprisingly, the inmates aren't too upset about being back in their cell. As compared to the other prisons, this one has good food, huge bathtubs, gym equipment, and pretty much all the facilities they need. Sometime later, Jugo, inmate 15, tries escaping once again, but is quickly caught and sent back to the cell. Once inside, he tells the others about a mysterious hot bitch he saw on the way, so these degenerates immediately rush to the visiting room only to find her with the supervisor. They wonder how an incel like the supervisor can pull such a baddie, but it turns out that this baddie will eventually become a daddy, since he's actually a guy and the supervisor's younger brother. Suddenly, the supervisor gets called by his senior, so he leaves while Jugo tries to raise up his younger brother, who asks why the hell does he have BDSM gear on him. Jugo suddenly feels anger brewing inside of him as his mood darkens, and he claims that these shackles were put on him by a man with an ugly red scar on his neck, and the only reason why he came here was to find this ugly man and take revenge. The next day at Nanbaka prison, the supervisor checks cell 13 and finds Jugo missing. Naturally, he assumes another escape attempt, but nope, Jugo's just napping in the night duty room. Furious, the supervisor demands an explanation, and Jugo casually says he snuck out because his cellmates snore. As if that's not enough, Yamato, the dumb fuck, was busy training instead of guarding. As the inmates rave about how much better the food is compared to other prisons, the chef, a big softy despite his size, overhears their compliments and, in his excitement, dumps cake on their table as a thank you. After indulging in the chef's sugary gift, the inmates stumble upon a Rubik's Cube. Jugo quickly solves it in seconds, impressing everyone. Not willing to back down, another inmate, desperate to one-up him, hands Jugo a much harder puzzle. He solves that just as easily, leaving the challenger fuming and questioning his life choices. The supervisor, having had enough of their shenanigans, puts them to work building furniture. Jugo whines about the task being boring, but the supervisor tells him to be more like Nico, who, as it turns out, built a wooden robot instead of furniture. This infuriates the supervisor, who immediately lashes out and beats Nico senseless. As if that wasn't worse, another inmate carved a hot bitch to thirst after. Now it was Jugo's turn. He proudly shows the furniture he made. Impressed for a whole 2 seconds, the supervisor's joy evaporates when Jugo presses a button, revealing a self-opening drawer that dismantles and hits him square in the face. The supervisor, officially done with life, heads to his assistant to discuss how screwed they'll be if the head warden finds out about Cell 13's antics. Jugo pops in, cheerfully noting that it'd be pretty embarrassing. Furious, the supervisor cuffs him and tells his assistant to check if anyone else has escaped from their cell. Later, on a train ride to headquarters, the supervisor meets with the warden. He walks past a group of circus escapees, or so they seem, completely ignoring their warnings about the warden being busy. Marching into her office, he hands her some files, unaware that she's secretly thirsting after him. They accidentally touch hands, and she barely keeps her panties on. Her clueless guard attacks the supervisor, thinking that he troubled the lady, but the supervisor effortlessly flings him aside and gets down to business. After that nonsense, the warden and the supervisor discuss the inmates, starting with Nico, inmate 25. Turns out, Nico was arrested for drug abuse, and his grand reason for escaping his last prison: he hates needles. They were giving him injections for his food allergies. At Nanbaka, they give him oral meds instead, so he stays put. Problem solved? Next up, Inmate 69. He got locked up for gang riots but escaped his old prison because the food sucked. He's been a model inmate at Nanbaka, though, because the food here is the best. Then there's Inmate 11, who got arrested for running an underground casino. He escaped his last prison because he had a hot date with some random chick. Finally, Jugo, Inmate 15, the king of escapes, arrested for larceny. He broke out of his first prison the same day he got there. When the warden asks why he keeps escaping, the supervisor deadpans. He calls it his hobby. The next day, Hajim is stopped by his sobbing assistant, who complains about the inmates in cell 13 bullying him. Hajim tells him to man up and quit crying, but the assistant continues to talk about his horrible experience with the inmates. Hajim scolds him, telling him not to be scared of them and to fight back if necessary, but the poor guy can't stop crying and shares how they constantly make fun of him, making him want to quit his job. Hajim advises that quitting isn't the solution and he should be proud to be a prison guard. He says that if the assistant can hold his job here, he can do anything. Hajim then suggests using the inmates' weaknesses against them. He starts with Inmate 11, Uno, whose main weakness is hot women. Giving him a magazine full of attractive women should keep him busy for a while. As for Inmate 69, Rock, who is obsessed with food and fighting, all they need to do is give him an exciting menu to keep him engaged. For Inmate 25, Nico, the easiest one to deal with, they just need to give him an anime to watch. Finally, Inmate 15, Jugo, is the most difficult because escaping from prison is his only hobby. To keep Jugo in check, they need to manage the rest of the inmates carefully. After giving a lengthy lesson on how to control the inmates, Hajim returns to his work. He meets with the warden, who informs him about a new inmate and asks him to put the inmate in cell 13. They discuss the influence this new prisoner might have on the others, given Tsukumo's history of being captured and escaping. As Hajim leaves the warden's office, he meets his assistant, who excitedly shares how he managed to keep the inmates busy by following Hajim's advice. Hajim then tells him about the new transfer, and soon the inmates of cell 13 learn about the new arrival and wonder who their new cellmate will be. Just then, Tsukumo arrives in ninja style, leaving the inmates in awe. Everyone, except Jugo, gets excited about his ninja tricks and welcomes him. However, Jugo claims it's all a sham. In response, Tsukumo shares his escapism tactics, but Jugo still refuses to believe him. Tsukumo then challenges Jugo to a jailbreaking contest to prove his skills and defeat him. Angered, Jugo throws him to the ground before agreeing to the contest. Later, when the assistant checks on the inmates, they ignore him coldly, prompting him to rush back to Hajime and complain again. Meanwhile, Jugo and Tsukumo start their contest, with Tsukumo following Jugo, calling it a ninja shadow technique. The rest of the inmates gather to watch and cheer them on. Jugo begins by picking the gate locks and throwing a card to deactivate the laser traps, while Tsukumo simply follows him like a clueless puppy. Soon, they come face to face with Hajime. Tsukumo tries to demonstrate his great ninja techniques, but they are no match for Hajime, who simply punches and tosses him aside like a cockroach. Undeterred, Tsukumo tries even more useless techniques, throwing leaves and ninja blades, but in his clumsiness, he manages to trap himself with his own stupid ninja moves. Later, Hajime and the assistant review the CCTV footage and discover that Tsukumo somehow managed to find all the hidden cameras and pose for each one knowingly. Hajime decides that they should move this nuisance of a guy to cell 11 and be done with him. The next day, Yamato breaks open cell 13 and announces to the inmates that tomorrow is New Year's Eve, and there will be decorations and cleaning to do, which of course the inmates are responsible for. Meanwhile, Hajime goes to the warden's office to clean up, and the warden cannot resist admiring him longingly from her seat. Later, she discusses with the supervisors the upcoming New Year's tournament at Namba prison, where they challenge Hajime, claiming that his victory last year was a fluke. In the prison, the inmates of cell 13 reminisce about the previous year's events, rejoicing in the memories they made so far, and decide to break out of the prison to mark the start of the new year. The next day, everyone gathers to hear the announcements for the New Year's tournament. One of the supervisors reads out the names of the participants and explains the rules. The inmates and officers from each building are formed into teams, and each member of the winning team is handsomely rewarded. Guards receive pay bonuses, while each inmate on the winning team gets to select an item of their choosing. As soon as they hear this, the inmates of cell 13 get excited and run to Hajime, begging him to take them as his teammates. However, the assistant informs them that this decision is up to the warden. Fortunately for them, the warden, Momoko, abuses her power and signs up the inmates of cell 13 for the tournament. One of the guards, along with his team, approaches Hajime and mocks him for getting stuck with the cell 13 inmates. The rest of the guards arrive, and they all engage in a pointless competition about who is better. This nonsense goes on for a while, providing free entertainment for the inmates. Soon the first event is announced, and the commentator reveals that it's a calligraphy contest. The inmates are horrified upon hearing this and turn to Jugo, hoping he might help them clear the round. Jugo gracefully pulls out his brush and gets started, but they soon realize how pathetic he is at it. They shamefully realize that Jugo is only good at breaking out of prison, nothing else. Thankfully, the guards, Yamato and Hajime, impress everyone with their perfect calligraphy skills. The inmates stare in awe as the supervisor informs them that both guards are licensed calligraphers. Thanks to Hajime, the team moves to the next round, securing the first victory for Cell 13. From above, the warden watches and gets lovey-dovey, wishing Hajime would write her name. The announcement for the second event is made, a contest of mochi pounding and daruma drop, whatever that means. Apparently, the team has to complete the mochi without letting their daruma hit the ground, a contest of strength and stamina. Yamato brings a huge hammer and gives it to Jugo, who immediately drops it, unable to hold its weight. But Rock manages to lift it and goes with Yamato to participate. Yamato tells him to guard their daruma while he handles the pounding. Rock faces off against Liang, a former cellmate from Building 5 who seeks revenge. Liang appears out of nowhere and furiously knocks one of their blocks, leaving Rock shocked. They throw insults at each other and start fighting. Liang breaks his hammer and confronts Rock, while Yamato faces an ugly but powerful opponent. The opponent lunges at Yamato with all his strength, while Liang furiously attacks Rock, explaining how he was defeated by Rock long ago and has since made it his life mission to train hard and defeat him. But Rock is busy daydreaming about the stone oven he'll ask for as his prize if he wins the tournament, confusing everyone. They can't understand why he would ask for such a useless item when he could have practically anything. After some fighting, Rock knocks Liang out with a single punch and throws him out of the tournament single-handedly. Inspired by this, Yamato adopts a more aggressive approach and also wins his match with a single punch, launching his opponent into the sky. Just like that, Cell 13 wins this round and advances to the next. The next event is a card game called Hyakunin Issue, where Yuno and the supervisor Seto are selected to represent Cell 13. As the match begins, Seto wonders if Uno will manage on his own or if he should explain the rules to him one more time. The match starts, and Seto faces his opponent, who clearly underestimates him. When Seto instantly wins the match, his opponent stares at him in shock. Now it's Uno's turn, and he seems to struggle against a pretty boy opponent. He struggles for a while, unable to keep up with him and his teammate. They mock him for being slow, but suddenly, Uno gets an idea. When the other team's leader mocks Uno for still being unsuccessful and planning to cheat, Jugo tells the guy that Uno is a genius and doesn't need to cheat to win. Just as he says this, Uno quickly changes his tactics and defeats his opponent by reading his body language. The opponent's friend steps in and faces Uno, but Uno once again surprises everyone by winning, using the same body language reading technique. The opponents get really pissed, and one of their hair starts to form into arrows. His friend tries to calm him down, but Uno defeats them again, qualifying his team for the next round. Meanwhile, Nico encounters someone who seems to be floating while he is retrieving his medicine. Panicking, he runs back to the others, leaving his medicine behind, and tells Hajime about the incident, but Hajime doesn't believe him. The third event is announced, a spinning top battle, similar to Beyblade, but with supersized tops. The teams must set their tops spinning at the center of the stage and find a way to knock their opponent's top out. The commentator announces the remaining teams and who they will face, making snide remarks and insulting everyone. The competitors are enraged and ready to face their opponents. Just then, the commentator announces a new duo, and Nico quickly recognizes one of them as the floating guy. He tugs at Hajime's shirt, urging him to look. Excited, Nico jumps from his seat and accidentally shoves Hajime to the ground while asking everyone to watch the floating guy closely. Hajime gets mad, quickly gets up, and punches Nico in the head for his reckless behavior. As a result, Hajime and Nico are forced into the match against their opponents. The match begins, and the opponents go straight for Hajime, knowing he's the tougher of the two. Nico gets mad and hits them with an iron ball, scolding them for attacking 2 against 1, and goes on to lecture the duo. He gets excited again when one of the opponents, who wears glasses, climbs up the tournament wall and decides to take a nap. Nico faces off against the floating guy and begs him to teach him how to float. Nico doesn't quit and keeps pestering him, calling him a master. Eventually, the floating guy gets tired and offers to mentor Nico if he wins. Nico gets excited, jumps up, and is ready to prove himself. Meanwhile, Hajime battles against the monkey guy, and their fight continues for some time, all of which the warden is closely watching, wishing she were the one wrestling with Hajime, getting lovey-dovey again. Hajime throws his opponent to the ground and advances, but the floating guy attacks him from behind in a Goku-style move. Nico is impressed with his soon-to-be mentor and stands there dumbfounded. Even after Hajime tosses the opponent aside, Nico continues praising how great the guy is, annoying his teammates. Nico begs the floating guy to teach him the move and shows off by copying the technique Liang used earlier against Rock. The floating guy is impressed that Nico could copy and perfect a technique just by observing it for a few moments. Jugo and the rest discuss Nico's insane ability to perfectly mimic something if he finds it cool. Nico and the floating guy go back and forth attacking each other, but Nico ultimately throws him down once again, asking to become his disciple. The floating guy's friend, who is chilling at the top, tells Nico that it's actually the floating guy who should become Nico's disciple, since the only reason he entered the tournament was to find a worthy master. Nico gets excited, jumping up and down, asking to be picked as his mentor. He then reveals that if he wins the tournament, he would ask for a video game console, leaving everyone in disbelief at his idiocy. The floating guy's friend gets mad and throws him aside, calling him petty and childish. Meanwhile, Hajime continues his fight against the monkey guy, who won't stop bickering. The monkey guy accuses Hajime of hiding something about the inmates of Cell 13 and claims that Hajime lied to the warden when he said he had no problems with Cell 13. Hajime gets pissed, lifts him by the collar, and throws him aside, causing the other teams to use this distraction to advance against one another. Hajime continues beating the monkey guy mercilessly, while the warden fantasizes about romantic scenarios with him. The battle rages on, and Nico is still trying to convince the floating guy to take him as a disciple. Meanwhile, Hajime throws his top at his opponent and wins the match, while Nico wins by mimicking Yupa's movements. Just like that, Cell 13 wins this round and moves on to the final, as Nico passes out in exhaustion in Hajime's arms. As everyone prepares for the final round, a warden is locked in her office, secretly reading a book and blushing. One of her guards barges in, asking her to get ready to oversee the contest, and snatches the book from her hands. He's surprised to see it's filled with dessert and savory recipes. She quickly grabs it back, hugging it to her chest, claiming she was just reading it because she had nothing else to do, but in reality, she was learning how to fulfill her unrequited fantasies involving Hajime. Soon after, she puts on her cold, authoritative face and leaves for the tournament with the guard. On their way, they discuss the previous rounds and how Hajime secured the win, suggesting that the same might happen again this year. But the warden cuts him off, stating that the whole reason for this tournament is to display the guard's strength and remind the inmates of their place, keeping them in check. The guard teases her about Hajime, and she gets pissed, throwing him into the sky and chasing after him. Meanwhile, the monkey guy and another defeated contestant are in the hospital discussing their tragic loss. The other inmate mentions a guy named Kai, who can make all kinds of medicines and cures. The monkey guy recalls his fight with Hajime and wonders how Hajime kept going and defeated him so easily. Suddenly, the monkey guy remembers Kai offering him a numbing agent to use against Hajime and Nico. However, it didn't work because, according to Kai, Nico has been too obsessed with drugs in the past, which made him immune. Back at the tournament, the commentator announces the next event and wonders aloud why one contestant is bleeding, unaware of his earlier run-in with the warden. The warden congratulates the final contestants and announces the final event, a sake barrel opening contest. The objective is to open a giant sake barrel, and it's a two-man team event with one guard and one inmate per team. Jugo is literally pushed into participating by his loving cellmates, while Hajime assigns Yamato to compete. However, the opposing guard disapproves and challenges Hajime to participate instead. Hajime declines, claiming he's too tired from the previous night. Hearing this, the warden blushes and once again drifts into her fantasies about Hajime, admiring his physique. When Hajime still refuses to compete, the other guard asks the warden to make him participate. She gives him her infamous death stare, but internally, she's squealing with excitement to see Hajime perform. Unable to withstand her gaze, Hajime begrudgingly agrees to participate. The white-haired guard, enraged that Hajime was so easily convinced by the warden, grows suspicious, wondering if Hajime is trying to win her over. He becomes furious, unaware of the warden's true feelings. Meanwhile, Jugo is shocked when he meets his opponent. It's his former cellmate, the one obsessed with getting Jugo's shackles, no matter what. The contest begins and everyone rushes to take their positions. Jugo is immediately stopped by his orange-haired opponent, who throws a punch at him. Jugo gets up angry and faces him again. Everyone is puzzled as to why this guy has covered his eyes. Meanwhile, Hajime tries to leave, but his opponent pulls him back into the fight. Tired of this, Hajime tells him he can have the title because he's not interested. The opponent believes that the warden will only love him if he can beat Hajime in the tournament. The opponent then drags Hajime to the ground using a rope, but Hajime lands on his feet and charges at him full speed. He takes out his gun, pointing it at the guy, declaring that he has no interest in winning. Meanwhile, Jumo struggles to fend off his opponent and chases after him for answers. Hajime pulls out another gun, stunning his opponent, who is shocked to see him armed. What the opponent fails to notice is a box labeled "Help Yourself," filled with useful items for the contest. The commentator reveals the box and announces that anyone from either team can use its contents to fight. The white-haired guy is furious about this new addition, and Hajime takes advantage, firing rubber bullets at him. As the guy approaches, the warden blushes and cheers like a lovesick teenager, swooning over Hajime. The battle continues, with both sides using various weapons, but Hajime remains in control. While everyone expects him to win easily, they are more worried about Jugo, who is struggling against his opponent. Jugo's enemy taunts him, calling him useless compared to when he gouged out his eyes and lifts his mask to show the scars. Meanwhile, Hajime beats his pig-like opponent left and right, but the guy stubbornly keeps getting up, desperate to impress the warden. He glances back at her, hoping she'll see him as a man if he defeats Hajime. The pig-like guy then unleashes an invisible special technique, managing to land a cut on Hajime. The audience is curious about this new development, and the monkey guy, watching from the stands, realizes the opponent is moving his whip at an incredible speed, making it almost invisible and difficult to dodge. Meanwhile, Jugo is being beaten to a pulp, his skull nearly crushed. His opponent pushes him against the wall, threatening to take his shackles for himself. Hajime analyzes the situation from afar, wondering how to intervene. The white-haired guy continues using his invisible whip technique, but Hajime, having had enough, reads his body language and counters, landing precise blows that take him out. The crowd cheers for Hajime, and the warden is especially excited. Meanwhile, Jugo continues to struggle against the orange-haired guy, who demands that Jugo remove his shackles. Jugo replies that it's nearly impossible and that he's tried countless times. The orange-haired guy laughs and remarks that the only person who can remove them is the man with the scars. At the mention of this, Jugo tenses up. The man with the scars on his neck is the one who put the shackles on Jugo, and ever since, he's been unable to remove them. Furious, Jugo flies into a blind rage, punching wildly. The orange-haired guy unleashes his pyro attack, and everyone waits in anticipation. Jugo, beaten to the ground, gathers all his willpower and rises, breaking free from the rocks, pinning him down, unleashing a wild, powerful aura. The orange-haired guy asks why Jugo is so determined to hunt down the man with the scars. Jugo calls that man a sadist for tampering with his body and placing him in shackles, vowing never to forgive him and to destroy him once he gets the chance. While the tournament is unfolding, Tsukumo sits alone in his cell when Yamato arrives to escort him to the visiting room before heading back to the tournament. Tsukumo is surprised to have a visitor, especially one who's so excited to see him. However, upon meeting his visitor, Tsukumo attempts to leave immediately, but the man stops him, asking how things are going. Tsukumo sits down, asking how the visitor found him. The man chuckles, revealing that he had no trouble because he's Tsukumo's manager. He had discovered that Tsukumo was secretly arrested and transferred, but to cover it up, he fabricated a story about Tsukumo going missing and fooled everyone. Tsukumo says he should be fired for this, but the manager refuses, insisting that Tsukumo shouldn't be in jail. The manager then gets excited, exclaiming that since everyone thinks Tsukumo is missing, once he gets out, he'll attract a lot of attention and receive numerous job offers. Tsukumo, however, tells him that he won't lie to the world and that he's done being a star, suggesting the manager should find someone else. The manager grows angry, saying it was hard to track him down and that he needs him to start working again soon. Meanwhile, Jugo, who has just escaped from the tournament, meets a cute black kitten and lifts it up, joking that it's the one guard he couldn't mess with. He overhears Tsukumo's voice and sneaks in to listen as Tsukumo talks to his manager. Tsukumo is furious, accusing his manager and everyone else of being kidnappers and deceiving him, claiming they should be the ones in prison instead of him. He accuses the manager of helping a director who stole his life. This director was actually Tsukumo's mother, whom he deeply despises. Tsukumo recalls his past. His mother wanted to direct a ninja movie, but the manager was skeptical, as there were already plenty of ninja films. However, she insisted she would make it different by using an actual ninja as the lead, not just an actor. She took Tsukumo deep into the forest, searching for real ninjas, and eventually found signs of their presence. It turned out that young Tsukumo was the one practicing in secret, training to become a shinobi warrior so he could protect himself. When his mother and the manager approached him, they demanded to know where the other warriors were, but Tsukumo refused to reveal anything. Little Tsukumo began crying, explaining that he wasn't yet a shinobi and had been abandoned by the others. He was training in the mountains to become stronger and to one day rejoin the other warriors. His mother tried to console him, but he slapped her hands away and jumped back. Instead of being upset, she asked him how long it had been since he left his village. He told her his parents had been gone for so long that he barely remembered them, believing they left because he was worthless. He vowed to become stronger so he could find his parents one day. At that moment, his mother hugged him, crying as she revealed that she was actually his mother. Tsukumo believed her, especially when she promised never to abandon him again and gave him a scarf. But it was all a lie. She only wanted to use him to fulfill her selfish desire to direct a ninja movie. Wanting to please her, Tsukumo trained hard not to become a shinobi, but an actor. His mother continued this charade, grooming him to be an actor, and now that Tsukumo knows the truth, he hates her passionately. The manager asks what's the big deal whether she lied or not. Tsukumo got to enjoy fame and success. He should be grateful to her for raising him, the manager argues, but Tsukumo refuses, saying he should have become a shinobi instead. The manager retorts that Tsukumo was never any good at being a shinobi, but had natural talent for acting, something the director recognized early on. She took him in to make him a star. The manager continues, telling Tsukumo to be thankful for the life he's had: money, fame, luxury, but Tsukumo rejects all of it, saying he's perfectly fine in prison. Pissed, he storms out and finds Jugo sitting outside with a kitten. Jugo apologizes for eavesdropping and teases him about his face now that he's removed his ninja mask. Jugo then questions Tsukumo about his true nature. Tsukumo admits that while he liked acting, pretending to be someone else made him popular and likable, but not for who he really was. He continues petting the kitten, explaining that the real him was nothing more than a tool for fulfilling the audience's fantasies, and he couldn't live up to that image. Once he realized this, he ran away and has been struggling ever since. His ninja skills turned out to be useless, which the other inmates soon discovered, but he wasn't a bad actor, so he managed to keep up the charade for a while. Tsukumo then reveals to Jugo the real reason he was arrested. After running away, he went back to the village to resume his shinobi training and find the others, but he wandered onto private property and was arrested for trespassing. He thought playing the role of an escaped convict would be fun, but it landed him in Nanbaka prison. Jugo finds this story both hilarious and stupid. Jugo asks Tsukumo if he plans on leaving anytime soon, but Tsukumo says no, that he's comfortable here, where he can be himself. Jugo offers him some advice, telling him that he doesn't have to put on a show for anyone in prison, and that he can be his true self here. At the tournament, Jugo flies into a rage after hearing about the man with scars who placed him in shackles. His fury triggers a transformation. His shackles merge into his body as he attacks the orange-haired guy, destroying half the arena in the process. Yet the orange-haired guy is nowhere to be found. The warden orders damage control as chaos erupts, with everyone running in panic. People are stunned by Jugo's sudden transformation and the massive destruction he's caused. Jugo, even angrier now, launches another attack on the orange-haired man, who somehow manages to hold his ground and put up a good fight. The warden wonders if Jugo's transformation is linked to the shackles, speculating that they might be turning him inhuman. Unsure how to handle the situation, she orders the guards to capture both inmates. Hajime and the others jump in to follow her orders, but the orange-haired guy hurls a fireball at them and continues battling Jugo. Jugo demands that the orange-haired guy reveal information about the man with the scar, threatening to gouge out his eyes like he did before. But the orange-haired guy dismisses Jugo, saying he's not careless anymore, and they continue fighting. He traps Jugo in a circle of fire, threatening to burn him alive to finally rid him of his shackles. The supervisor orders everyone to evacuate the arena as the fight grows more dangerous. However, Wuno and the other inmates of Cell 13 refuse to leave, hiding nearby out of concern for Jugo. Yamato tells them Jugo is in serious trouble for attacking both guards and fellow inmates. They watch, worried, wondering how they can help. As the battle rages on, another guard steps in, demanding that the two inmates surrender, but the orange-haired guy calls him an idiot and tells him to shut up. He hurls a massive fireball at the guard, but the other guards join forces to deflect the attack. The guards fight among themselves but manage to push forward in an attempt to capture the inmates. They team up, surrounding the orange-haired guy. As he launches another fire attack, the guards deflect it again, noting that he needs time to recharge between fire blasts. When he attacks again, the monkey guy traps him, and the guards combine their weapons to finally pin him down. Now Jugo is the only one left standing. Hajin goes after him, firing shots, but the bullets don't harm Jugo. The two seem evenly matched as they fight. Unable to watch his friend in danger, Wuno jumps down from his hiding spot and runs toward the battle. The others join him, trying to subdue Jugo. Rock grabs hold of Jugo, while the others attempt to calm him down. Jugo, however, breaks free and tosses them aside, still demanding to know where the scarred guard is. His friends, confused, wonder who Jugo is talking about, but they continue to try and restrain him. Once again, Jugo throws them off, and Uno begs him to come to his senses and remember who he is as he approaches him. Just then, Hajime steps in, saving Uno and telling him to stand back. He punches Jugo in the gut, causing him to collapse, bleeding. Hajime doesn't stop, delivering punch after punch as Uno stands there, helpless. The warden suddenly yells at Hajime to stop, and he immediately lets Jugo go. She orders the guards to call in medics and announces that the New Year's tournament has officially come to an end. A few days later, Hajime gets scolded for going overboard and beating Jugo too harshly, when the order was only to capture him. Hajime brushes it off, saying everyone is overreacting, but they accuse him of putting Jugo in critical condition and ruining the tournament. After more scolding, Hajime shrugs it off and heads back to Building 13. What happened during the tournament's conclusion was that when the warden announced the end, Yamato and Hajime simply broke out the sake, declaring themselves the winners, shocking everyone. When Hajime returns to Cell 13, Uno angrily throws things at him, demanding to know what he was thinking when he beat Jugo so badly. Everyone is furious with Hajime, especially Uno. They have a tense staring contest, and Uno accuses Hajime of being willing to kill for his job. Hajime admits that it's true, but also acknowledges that he went too far this time. Hearing this, Uno calms down a little and tells Hajime that while Jugo is terrible at most things like calligraphy, math, and sports, but he's exceptionally good at escaping prisons. That's the one thing he excels at. They share fond memories of Jugo and insist that he's not a monster, he truly cares about them. They ask Hajime where Jugo is, but he leaves without answering. Outside, Hajime sits down for some peace when one of the commentator guards approaches and hands him a private message from the warden. The guard reads it aloud. Hajime from Building 13 is suspended for 3 days. The guard laughs at him while Hajime lowers his head in shame. Meanwhile, the warden cries in her office, not wanting to suspend Hajime, but doing so out of duty. After 3 days, Hajime returns to work and asks his assistant if there had been any trouble with the Cell 13 inmates. The assistant tells him that, surprisingly, the inmates behaved very well in his absence. They didn't even try to escape once. The bar was set pretty low for them. As Hajime walks on, the white-haired guard approaches him and informs him that Jugo has woken up. Hajime replies that he was just on his way to see him. They exchange glares, accusing each other of letting their inmates run wild and cause havoc. Hajime points out that the orange-haired guy caused far more destruction with his fire attacks than Jugo did. The other guards inform Hajime that the orange-haired inmate is now chained up in another building, refusing to speak unless he can talk to Jugo. Hajime scoffs, stating that the orange-haired guy clearly has more on his mind than friendly conversation. But the guards explain that allowing these two to talk could help them uncover the origins of their powers. One guard tosses his cell phone to Hajime, suggesting that at the very least, they let the two inmates speak over the phone. Hajime mocks the guard for taking orders from prisoners, but the guard insists they have no choice if they want to gather more information both inmates are too violent to ignore. Later, the white-haired guard visits his locked-up inmate, asking if he's comfortable in his cell. The inmate responds by saying that if it were any darker, he'd complain. The guard, puzzled, asks how he would know that since he can't see. The inmate simply says it's a guess and then requests to speak to Jugo. Meanwhile, Jugo is being held in a similar situation and Hajime goes to see him. Hajime places the phone on the ground in front of Jugo and cuts the CCTV footage, asking if Jugo wants to be freed from his chains. This catches Jugo's attention as he had been silent until then. Jugo replies that there's no need. Hajime then turns on the phone, informing Jugo that the orange-haired inmate is on the other line. The orange-haired guy begins talking about the man with scars, revealing that he too is searching for the same man. He wanted to gauge how much Jugo knew about the scarred man before making his next move. He asks Jugo if he has any idea where the man is or what he's been up to. Jugo grits his teeth and admits that he doesn't know, revealing that he was hoping to learn that information from the orange-haired guy. Jugo explains that the man with scars is the one who put him in shackles, but beyond that, he knows nothing about him. The orange-haired guy questions whether Jugo's only goal is to get his shackles removed. Jugo confirms this, but the other inmate doesn't believe him and starts laughing loudly. Jugo, now frustrated, asks why the orange-haired guy is so obsessed with his shackles. The orange-haired inmate explains that the shackles themselves don't hold much significance to him, they're merely a means to an end. They would help him get closer to the scarred man so he could finally kill him. Shocked, Jugo asks why he would go to such extremes. The orange-haired inmate continues, explaining that like Jugo, he was made to suffer by the scarred man, but for a much longer time. That man turned both of them into monsters, but the orange-haired inmate endured it far longer. He goes on to describe how he had suffered greatly, constantly struggling to understand his power. One day, the man with the scar appeared, introducing himself as a scientist. The scientist promised to take away the orange-haired inmate's suffering, but that was far from what happened. Instead, the scientist exploited his physique and unique powers for his own experiments. Jugo, confused, asks how this is possible, considering his fire powers seem beyond science. The orange-haired inmate retorts, telling Jugo to think back his own shackles are beyond science too. He continues, explaining that though he was once considered a freak for his strange abilities, the scientist turned him into a true monster. The man modified him to control his fire ability instead of curing him and turning him into a normal human being. In a fit of rage and frustration, the orange-haired inmate tried to kill the scientist with his flames, but the man cut through the fire with ease and injured him badly in return. Jugo then asks if the scarred man, the mad scientist, also had shackles like his own. The orange-haired inmate confirms it, saying that the scientist's shackles transformed into blades just like Jugo's do. Furious, Jugo finally understands why the orange-haired guy wants his shackles, so he can match the scientist's power and kill him. The orange-haired inmate confirms this, asking Jugo once again for the shackles. But Jugo refuses, telling him it's a bad idea. The inmate, however, doesn't care as long as it gives him a chance to take revenge. He then reveals that he can't use his fire anymore because the doctors here implanted something inside him like a computer chip that suppresses his power. That's why he can't use his fire to escape Nanbaka prison, and for the time being, he's stuck there. After the call ends, Jugo calls the orange-haired guy an idiot, but Hajime interjects, saying that Jugo is even worse. He tells Jugo that he's empty inside, he has no real purpose in life. Even his hobby of escaping from prisons is meaningless. Hajime continues, pointing out that if Jugo had any real desire or motive, he would have figured out why the orange-haired guy told him his story, even though it seems pointless now. When Jugo first came to Nanbaka, he had a purpose for the first time, to escape. But he never fully committed to it or managed to stay free because he was afraid of what would happen if he truly escaped. That's why he kept prolonging his efforts to break out. Jupo tries to argue, but Hajime tells him that deep down he's terrified. He knows he's getting closer to his target, the scientist, and if he really wanted to find him, he would have already uncovered something by now. Jugo agrees, cursing his shackles, and begins reflecting on his childhood. Back then, he never enjoyed or wanted anything in life, he was just existing. He realizes he didn't care about the tournament either and only participated because the others did. He never had any real interests or hobbies, but when the shackles were placed on him for the first time, he had a motive: to find the scientist. However, that was before he understood what the shackles truly were and the power they held. He then thinks about his friends and their sense of purpose. They enjoyed even the simplest things and had meaning in their lives. Jugo admits to feeling jealous of them, but despite that, he had fun being with them. That's why he never really put much effort into escaping. Now though, he fears that his friends will reject him after seeing the monster he's become. He feels remorse for hurting them and even contemplates chopping off his limbs. Hajime calls him an idiot and tells him that hiding from the situation isn't going to solve anything. He asks Jugo why he really came to Nanbaka in the first place. At first, Jugo says he came in search of the scientist, but then realizes he's been lying to himself. In frustration, he cries out, asking Hajime what he should do. Hajime tells him that since they won the tournament, Jugo can ask for anything he wants as his prize, but he has to decide quickly. Suddenly, Jugo remembers what his friends wanted, their wishes, and the things they enjoyed. He finally understands that he wasn't truly happy before, he was just feeding off their happiness. He then tells Hajime what he wants: a chance. Hajime agrees, saying that Jugo will be forgiven for his actions during the tournament and can return to Cell 13. During the 3 days of Hajime's suspension, Cell 13 was stunned to learn that he was no longer their supervisor. Instead, the white-haired guard Kenshiro had taken over. Even the other guards were equally surprised by the change, as the warden was adamant about maintaining peace in Building 13, with all the guards contributing. Kenshiro was the most upset about the situation, but he couldn't disobey the warden's orders. Reluctantly, he began his new role and was already conducting the 25th checkup on Cell 13. He informed the inmates about Jugo's progress, explaining that Jugo was being treated at a special facility and couldn't have any visitors for the time being. The inmates were surprised when they found the pretty boys from the infirmary, the same ones they had defeated in the tournament. However, they were puzzled to see the pretty boys acting as though they were gravely injured, despite their minor wounds. Curious, the inmates questioned the doctor about the pretty boy's condition. The doctor informed them to wait their turn, and mentioned that Nico might experience lingering effects from the tournament. He explained that Nico's ability to mimic others could have caused some kind of infection. At that moment, a robot nurse named Kaguya entered, and both Uno and Rock immediately became infatuated with her. They began pestering her for dates, while Nico, being his usual perverted self, asked if he could sleep on her lap. The trio showed no respect for the poor robot nurse, constantly bothering her. On the second day of Hajime's suspension, things got even worse. A creepy red-haired guard was assigned as the supervisor. The mood darkened at the mention of Jugo's name, and the inmates talked about how his absence had affected them. In an attempt to lift their spirits, they decided to create a fake Jugo by drawing his head on a newspaper. Fed up with their antics, the new supervisor decided to give them a lesson on Nanbaka's layout. He projected a map of Japan and showed them pictures of the prison's facilities. There was even movie theater, but it was strictly for the guards, crushing Nico's hopes. The supervisor explained that the inmates were grouped by their crimes, traits, and abilities and assigned to the guards who managed them best. Meanwhile, Ono decided to take a nap with the fake Jugo, which infuriated the new supervisor, who kicked him on the butt. The supervisor then gave out points. Rock and Nico received 9 and 10, but Uno was given only 2. Furious, Uno entered into a petty argument with the supervisor. Just then, the assistant arrived to check on them, curious about the noise, but the inmates were rude to him as well. During this time, despite being suspended, Hajun was still working on paperwork, much to his sister's concern. She worried about him overworking himself even while suspended. On the third and final day of Hajim's suspension, a new supervisor, a monkey-like guard, was put in charge. He questioned the assistant about the inmate's behavior and was satisfied with the answer. However, when he checked on cell 13, he found the inmates asleep. Furious, he yelled at them for being lazy. Terrified of being dragged into one of Yamato's intense training sessions, the inmates quickly jumped out of bed and fled. But Yamato quickly found them and tried to persuade them to join his training session. The inmates dreaded this, fearing for their lives. Tsukumo, however, eagerly joined and talked about the importance of training for a ninja, much to Yamato's delight. The inmates, desperate to avoid training, started making excuses, even pretending that Jugo had contracted some long, unpronounceable disease. They gathered around the fake Jugo, giving their fake condolences as if he had already died. The monkey-like supervisor grew suspicious of their behavior. When Rock tried to make another excuse, the supervisor ordered Yamato to drag him away. The supervisor reflected on Jugo's performance during the tournament and decided it was time for everyone to leave, but Uno hid behind Nico in defiance. The supervisor hesitated, not wanting to upset Nico and trigger another outburst like the one during the tournament, which would force him to write an apology to the officials. Rock, sensing the tension, revealed that Nico had taken his medicine that day, assuring the supervisor that he would behave normally. However, Rock still wanted Uno and Nico to join him in his fate as Yamato dragged him away. Yamato then pushed the remaining inmates through an intense training session until they were nearly exhausted. Just like that, the 3 days of Hajim's suspension passed, and we returned to the present. Jugo was finally released from his confinement and appreciated the clear blue sky after so long. Hajime dragged him back to Building 13, and along the way, Jugo asked why the orange-haired inmate had told him all those things. Hajime admitted he didn't know, but he had a pretty good guess. The orange-haired guy wanted Jugo to go after the scientist. Since his fire powers had been taken, he could no longer get his revenge and wanted Jugo to be the one to do it. Hajime then added that the scientist likely put the shackles on Jugo to perfect them for his own use, treating Jugo as a mere guinea pig. When Jugo finally returned to his cell, everyone was thrilled to see him except Uno, who was upset that Jugo had left them. However, he softened up again soon after. The inmates quickly caught Jugo up on everything that had happened over the past 3 days, and Jugo felt a wave of remorse. He apologized to them for losing control and for keeping so much hidden during the tournament. He expressed how deeply sorry he was for all the pain he had caused them. Sometime during the night, Rock awakens from a troubling nightmare about his past, but despite the lingering effects, he reassures Jugo that he's perfectly fine. He explains that he's particularly excited because today is the day he's finally going to receive his prize, a coveted stone oven, as a reward for winning the recent tournament. Meanwhile, in another part of the prison, the floating guy and Liang are busy in their cell, training and discussing the latest developments. Their conversation is interrupted when their supervisor, Inori, shows up and escorts them out of their building, Building 5, and takes them over to Building 13. Inori explains that Rock had requested to see them. When they arrive at the new building, Rock welcomes them and offers them their first slices of freshly baked pizza from his newly acquired stone oven. He eagerly shares the pizza with everyone. While the others dig in, Liang is initially hesitant, but with some gentle encouragement from the inmates of Cell 13, as well as from Inori, he eventually gives in and takes a slice. To his surprise, Liang finds the pizza incredibly delicious and enjoys it far more than he expected. Rock takes the opportunity to explain the benefits of using a stone oven for cooking, and the others, including Yamato and Jugo, express their appreciation for the fantastic food. The pizza made in the stone oven seems to bring a sense of warmth and satisfaction to everyone who tries it. Not stopping there, Rock also offers Liang some traditional Chinese food, triggering a sudden wave of nostalgia for Liang. The flavors remind him of home, and he begins to realize how he had never really taken the time to appreciate his meals or anything else, for that matter, before this moment. Moved by the kindness shown to him, Liang finally admits how much it all means to him, and he even takes the opportunity to apologize to Rock for being so distant and cold in the past. Rock accepts the apology graciously and emphasizes how important it is to appreciate the food we have, a lesson that resonates with everyone present. Liang thanks Rock once again before returning to his building, now feeling more connected to his fellow inmates. After Liang leaves, Jugo reflects on how Rock seems to have changed recently. He notes that Rock's change is subtle, but definitely for the better. This reflection causes Rock to think back to his own violent past, specifically the abuse he endured at the hands of cruel guards in a former prison. He recalls how Jugo had once broken him out of that terrible place and treated him to a meal afterward. It was a meal that Rock had eaten to his heart's content, something he hadn't experienced in a long time, and it brought him immense happiness. Jugo, on the other hand, doesn't remember doing anything particularly significant for Rock, but Rock simply brushes it off with a smile, assuring Jugo that he did more for him than he realizes. Rock then adds that one day they'll find Jugo's favorite food too, hinting at a bright future ahead. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the prison, Nico is undergoing a medical exam as he does every week. He lies there feeling lonely, sad, and isolated, and his miserable expression is enough to concern even the robot nurse tending to him. Sensing Nico's gloom, Uno offers to bring him some leftovers, and he, along with Jugo and Rock, heads to the infirmary to visit Nico. Upon arriving, they're accompanied by the prison scientist Okina and the doctor, who warn them not to excite Nico too much. Nico's mood continues to sour, which Uno and Rock jokingly attribute to his wife Kazari. Their suspicions turn out to be correct when Kazari dramatically breaks through the hospital wall, entering the room and immediately starting a petty argument with Nico in front of the robot nurse child. Despite their bickering, the robot nurse manages to guilt-trip the couple into calming down. Kazari then informs Nico that his gaming console is ready, piquing his interest. However, instead of a simple gaming console, Kazari reveals that an entire arcade room has been set up for him, much to Nico's delight and excitement. He thanks her profusely, but she waves it off as if it's no big deal. Kazari then asks the assistant why all the other inmates are present, noting that the arcade room was supposed to be Nico's prize. The assistant explains that the others were too excited and wanted to see the prize for themselves, unable to resist joining in. Nico, brimming with excitement, starts playing the various arcade games in the room. At some point, he requests Hajime and the assistant to summon the floating guy, eager to share the experience with him as well. Later, the floating guy arrives, clearly annoyed by the summons, but his mood is soon lightened. Meanwhile, Hajime and the monkey guy get into a petty competition, each boasting about their own inmates and getting into a pissing contest over whose inmates are better. All the while, the inmates of both Cell 13 and Cell 8 continue to enjoy playing the various games in the arcade. Elsewhere in the arcade, the commentator guard tries to convince Jugo to join in on the fun. Nico eventually pulls Jugo over to a crane game, where Uno demonstrates how to play by successfully winning a Jugo doll and giving it to him. Jugo, somewhat bewildered, accepts the gift. The floating guy is also persuaded to play, and though he loses at first and becomes frustrated, his mood shifts when he eventually wins a doll of himself, making him quite pleased. Toward the end of the day, Kazari gives Nico the actual gaming console that had been promised, but Nico surprisingly turns it down. He explains that he much prefers having the large arcade room so he can enjoy playing with his friends. As they talk, Nico shares how Jugo's introduction of him to Japanese culture, specifically manga and video games, completely changed his outlook on life. This revelation leaves Jugo surprised as he doesn't really recall doing anything special, but Nico assures him it made a huge difference. Jugo, in turn, expresses interest in learning more about video games, asking Nico to teach him how to play. Meanwhile, outside the arcade, Uno catches sight of the orange-haired guy heading somewhere with Kenshi. He quickly stops him, but Jugo steps in, insisting that the orange-haired guy is no longer a threat since he lost his fire powers. Despite Jugo's reassurance, Uno remains cautious and insists that the orange-haired guy should still apologize for his past actions. When the orange-haired guy does apologize, Uno immediately forgives him and invites him to join everyone in the arcade room. Kenshi agrees to let the orange-haired guy visit the arcade on the condition that he reveals more details about his past, leaving the door open for more revelations down the line. The orange-haired guy agrees to tell Kenshi about his past in exchange for permission to spend time with the others in the arcade room. He begins his story by explaining that from birth, he was different from other people. He had an unusually high body temperature, much higher than average. At first, his parents told him that this was something special, that his heat came from the sun and was a gift. They assured him that he was unique and that this ability made him special. However, as he grew older, the heat inside him became overwhelming. It wasn't something he could control, and eventually, it felt like his own body was burning from the inside out. Even though he underwent countless medical tests, all of which came back normal, his condition only worsened. The lack of answers from doctors left him feeling anxious, and over time, he started suffering from chronic nightmares. His life became more and more difficult to manage. One day, his body was consumed by flames that covered him entirely, causing him severe burns. The doctors labeled his condition as spontaneous human combustion, but no one could explain why it was happening or how to stop it. Still, his parents never gave up on him. Their comforting presence was the only thing that kept him grounded during those dark times. As he grew older, he managed to go to college, but things didn't improve there. He was soon ostracized by a certain student who began spreading malicious rumors about him. The rumors claimed that he was an arsonist, which caused the other students to fear him. He was avoided, and many came to despise him because of these lies. Feeling despondent and alone, he dropped out of college and returned home to his parents, hoping to find some solace. But when he arrived, his world collapsed even further. He found his home engulfed in flames. To his horror, the same man who had spread the rumors about him in college was there, accusing him of setting a fire that was destroying his family's home. The police arrived soon after, and despite his innocence, they believed the man's lies and moved to arrest him. Panicking, the orange-haired guy resisted arrest, and once again, his body burst into flames. As he combusted in front of the onlookers, they recoiled in fear, calling him a monster. At that moment, he lost all hope and the will to fight back, allowing himself to be taken into custody without any more resistance. At first, being in jail felt like a relief, as if it were a sanctuary from the outside world. He was no longer a threat to anyone, or so he thought. One day, however, he was approached by a mysterious man with a scar. This man promised to fix his condition and rid him of his uncontrollable flames. Desperate for a solution, the orange-haired guy agreed to the man's offer. But instead of fixing him, the scared man only made things worse. He enhanced the orange-haired guy's ability to control fire, allowing him to summon and manipulate flames at will without suffering any physical damage. This infuriated him, as he had only wanted the flames to disappear, not to have more control over them. He just wanted a normal life free from fire. When the orange-haired guy voiced his anger, his complaints were met with mockery from Elf, another figure who was involved in this plot. Elf revealed that he had posed as a student in college, and it was him who framed the orange-haired guy. It had all been part of a scheme to use him for their twisted experiments. Enraged, the orange-haired guy lashed out, attacking Elf and trying to kill the scared man with his flames. However, the scared man was far more powerful than he had imagined. He sliced through the flames effortlessly with his blades, and in the ensuing battle, he cut out one of the orange-haired guy's eyes, leaving him permanently scarred. As the orange-haired guy finishes telling his story, he doubts whether Kenshi will believe him. After all, he has no evidence to back up his claims. Despite his doubts, he expresses relief that he no longer has the power to control fire, as that part of his life is behind him now. Much to his surprise, Kenshi believes his story. Kenshi explains that before becoming a prison guard, he had worked as a police officer investigating cases involving inmates being used for human experimentation. He had resigned from the force when no one believed his claims, and he became a prison guard to continue his quest for justice from the inside. Kenshi promises the orange-haired guy that he will help expose the people who had abused him and ensure they are brought to justice. The two shake hands, forming an unexpected bond over their shared desire for the truth to be revealed. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the prison, Luno and the pretty boy are in the middle of a heated argument. Luno had invited the inmates from Building 3 to visit his newly planned arcade room, but the pretty boy isn't happy about it. Despite the bickering, Luno's friend drags him along to the empty room. Once there, Luno explains that he wants the construction of the arcade room to be a collaborative effort among the inmates, rather than something he does alone. Hajime Yamato and the assistant arrive, bringing with them a furniture set that had been purchased with money Uno had earned. Soon after, the monkey guy enters the room with the inmates from Cell 8, carrying an old mahjong table. Just as they are getting settled, the commentator guard arrives in grand fashion, knocking several people aside with his large collection of games, which includes dartboards, billiard tables, and more. The inmates are thrilled, while Hajime, as usual, is left annoyed by the chaos. The pretty boys impress the others by showing off their skills in darts and pool. Shortly after, Kenshi arrives, bringing the orange-haired guy with him so he can join in the fun. Later, Hajime orders everyone to return to their cells, but his command is met with loud protests and resistance from the inmates who are enjoying their time in the arcade. That night, Jugo and Uno sit together, reflecting on the day's events. Jugo, with a sense of guilt, wonders if he deserves to have this much fun, considering the life he's led and his time in prison. Leno, in his usual tactless manner, points out the reasons why Jugo might not deserve it, but quickly adds that despite his past, Jugo is still a good person. He encourages him to socialize more and learn to enjoy life, even within the confines of prison. Feeling encouraged, Jugo breaks out of his cell and heads outside, where he gazes up at the night sky in a rare moment of joy and freedom. But his moment of peace is soon shattered by the unwelcome appearance of Elf, bringing the day's events to an ominous close. The elf taunts Jugo, telling him to make him laugh. Confused and unnerved by the elf's appearance, Jugo doesn't recognize him. As Jugo turns in anger, the elf teleports onto a nearby water tank amused. He hints that they played together in the past, leaving Jugo struggling to remember. The elf teleports again, appearing to stab Jugo, but it's just an illusion. The elf keeps teleporting, asking if Jugo remembers the man who risked everything to protect him. Jugo, frustrated, demands the elf stop being cryptic and explain. Instead, the elf taunts him further, calling Jugo Specimen 15 Lenoy, and insisting he use the weapons given to him to gather more data. Jugo curses the elf, refusing to harm others with the blades forced on him. The elf, now furious, pins Jugo down and drives a knife through his hand, commanding him to stop insulting his master. As the elf rants about how he should have killed Jugo before, Jugo has a flashback of a man sacrificing his life to help him escape. Enraged, the elf threatens to kill everyone around Jugo, though his mission is to retrieve only Jugo's brain. He mockingly traces a line across Jugo's face, threatening to take it. Desperate, Jugo unleashes his sword arm but controls its power, breaking free and shattering the elf's weapon. Once again, it's revealed to be another illusion. Satisfied with the data collected, the elf prepares to leave, urging Jugo to use his blades more. When Jugo asks about someone named Mai, the elf denies knowing Musashi but warns he'll return and threatens to use Jugo's friends as lab rats. He leaps off, promising to visit again. Shaken, Jugo fears for his friend's safety. The next day, Rock notices something off, but Jugo insists he's fine. That night, determined to protect them, Jugo sneaks out to escape Nanbaka for good. However, Wano, Nico, and Rock wake up, eager to join him. As the prison alarm blares and Nanbaka goes into lockdown, Jugo reaches the final door only to find Hajin waiting. Wanting to protect his friends, Jugo locks them inside and prepares to face Hajin alone. Jugo and Hajin engage in a fierce fight, both unleashing their full strength. Just before things escalate further, Siguro arrives and opens the gate, allowing Uno and Rock to intervene. They stop the fight and remind Jugo of the promises they've made. Realizing his place is with his friends, Jugo vows to protect them and never run away again. Meanwhile, across the ocean, a top-secret impregnable prison exists, hailed as the world's #1 with no known escapes until now.